Hello, my sacred ones, and welcome to my first ever podcast. I'm Savina Leo. So this being my first podcast, I wanted to do a little intro video about who I am, where I'm from, and my spiritual journey. So I'm from an island called Trinidad and Tobago. I am Indo-Caribbean, which basically means my forefathers came from India 170 years ago. As indentured laborers, and they never left, thank God, because being from the Caribbean is so unique and so much fun, and it's such a melting pot of cultures. We are influenced by American culture because we live in the Western Hemisphere, and we're also influenced by British culture because we were ruled by Britain. We also have influence from Indian and African culture, and we have smaller mixes of Chinese and Syrian and Spanish influence. So we're just like this big mix of the world in one place, which created a dynamic culture that was a blessing to grow up in, because we had so many influences and we developed our own identity as Caribbean people. So we developed our own food and our own culture, things like soca music, which came from calypso music, and food like doubles. If you've not had a doubles, find a Trinidadian restaurant near you and please have some. It's godsend. There are benefits to living an island life. I mean, we don't rely on tourism like other Caribbean countries, so we're not really a touristy place. We're more of a productive nation. We rely on oil and gas. We have natural resources, but I mean, we're not as like overly productive as Americans are, or we find a nice balance between getting shit done, but also knowing how to have a good time. So my whole spiritual awakening happened to me when I was 19, and it was a friend who literally came to me and was having very different conversations with me, and it was almost like he unlocked something within me. It was like a key that was unlocking like all this past life knowledge that I had, all this hidden things within me, and I was like, yeah, this is it. This deeply resonates with me. And he then proceeded to teach me how to develop abilities, how to develop your psychic abilities, how to develop natural abilities that we all have. And I worked with him for a couple of years, and then we just kind of grew apart, and then I started to do my own work. Like most people, I started to read, and Brian Weiss, his book Many Lives, Many Masters was one of my first books that I started with, and then read so many books afterwards. And then I started to realize that like I started to develop and download knowledge on my own. So the real gift that I gave to myself was I started to listen to my inner knowing, my intuition above anybody else in my life. And at times it would seem extremely crazy to do that, to listen to myself. Like people would be like, what are you doing with your life? And I just was like, no, this is what is right for me, and I'm going to listen to that. And the more I trusted in my intuition, in my knowing, in my abilities, the more things open up for me, the more I started to manifest things, the more my life would seem to fall into place. And with that, the abilities that I started to develop were my clairaudient ability. I realized that I was heavily clairaudient. I could hear what people's souls were saying to me. So they would be relating their life story to me, and I would actually hear what their soul is trying to relate. I would hear other people's guides, and I would hear what their guides were trying to tell them. For most of us, your guides are always speaking to you, but what happens is we hear those nudges of, yeah, I should be doing this, but then you don't do it. And what happens is a guide will come to me and be like, hey, we're trying to say this to this person and they're not listening. I need you to relate this message to them. So I constantly hear guides and people's souls talking to me all the time, their higher selves. I'm also a Reiki and angel practitioner, astrologer, because astrology changed my life. How did astrology change my life, you ask? Well, I was in search of understanding why things happened to me the way they did in my life. And what astrology did, it gave me the understanding of, oh, your life is delayed because you're heavily influenced by Saturn. And I go, this makes sense to me. I'm basically a transformational alchemist. I can identify what someone needs in order to shift their life. So I grew up being Hindu, and being part of the spiritual community and being Hindu means that a lot of these New Age concepts are not New Age, they're ancient, and a lot of them come from Hinduism, so it wasn't a hard leap for me to understand. But I did have to decipher from tradition and actual Vedic concepts and separate the two, because growing up Indian means you have a lot of culture embedded in you, and you have to sort of deprogram yourself from what is traditional and what is actually spiritual and good for your soul. Growing up Indian means your parents care more about what other people think rather than what you think, your happiness, your development. It's always what will people say? And you have to really fight hard to find who you are. And that takes a lot of courage to do. But thankfully, I was influenced by Mother Kali and Mother Durga, and understanding that being fierce is also part of being an Indian. There are a lot of women who are the Mother Saraswatis and the Mother Lakshmis of society, and that's great. We need that gentleness, we need that compassion and that care and that very feminine touch. But there are also women who are very fierce and doesn't stand for a lot of shit, and they're intense, and I will fall under that category. I am a very intense individual, and if you are in my life, it takes a lot to really understand who I am and to appreciate what I bring to the table. Because if you bring bullshit around me, I will start to clear that shit out. And most of the time, when the ego is involved, it is not the gentle, kind compassion that will shift the ego or change anything. It's actually our intense fierceness, and that fierceness really helps to shift things over time. So I guess my point is, if you're here to really be spoon-fed in a really nice way on spirituality, you will get some of that here. I say this because when you come here, you are going to get some harsh truths, but those truths are going to be able to help you push past the obstacles and the blocks and the parts of you that are stuck. And sometimes you need a gentle push, and sometimes you need a harder push. So take what resonates and leave what doesn't, and remember to always trust yourself. So this podcast is basically here to help you navigate the world that we live in, the wonderful world that we live in, and help you break down spiritual concepts that might not be as easy for you to understand. And we're just going to go on this journey together. Talk to you guys soon.